a lot of organizations want to recognize it in some way, but then there is also this kind of other side of it where folks within organizations are like, well, we don't really have any trans people, so is there any point in worrying about this right now?
There sometimes can be the expectation or the assumption that visibility equals good, invisibility equals bad, and certainly is not the case at all.
Trans Day of Visibility is just around the corner, and we celebrate it every single year on March 31st. It's often seen as a moment to celebrate and recognize trans and non-binary people and the contributions they make to the world. And while all of this is true, at the same time, visibility is rarely a simple thing when being seen for who you are can come with very real risks. We are spending some time sitting with that complexity, why Trans Day of Visibility is so important beyond just trans people, especially within organizations where so many individuals and their families, friendships, and communities outside of work are shaped by these questions of visibility and safety, even if they're not trans themselves. As always, I'm glad to be joined by Kai. How are you doing, Kai?
I'm doing fantastic. How about yourself?
I'm great, thank you. I'm feeling I've got a bit of a husky voice, although I think it's not as bad as it was last week. So hopefully it's not too obvious, but I am recovering from a cold. I'm being very dramatic about it, and my voice is following the drama. So
it seems to be making the rounds. So you're not alone in having that. I hear a lot of people hacking up along. So
oh, great. Sharing the love. That sounds good. So for listeners who might not be familiar, maybe we should start with what Trans Day of Visibility is. We do have another episode from last year about it, so I can link that too. But I just sort of, as a little overview, what is Trans Day of Visibility, Kai, and why does it exist?
Right. Yeah, the big question. And certainly for people who are perhaps new to the topic of trans and non-binary identities, this is something that has been going on for quite a while now, over a decade, almost 2 decades now. Since 2009, we've had the Trans Day of Visibility, as you mentioned, on March 31st every year. And essentially, it's a way to celebrate being trans, right? And it's actually set up in contrast to another day that happens annually, which is the Trans Day of Remembrance that happens in November. And so that one's about who we've lost through transphobic violence and really somber, understandably so. And then this one is supposed to be the counterpoint that things are bad, and it's important to look at what's bad and to address the problems and to avoid having people be murdered.
Right.
But we can also, and it's really important to just see how far we've come, also much further we need to go, and to celebrate ourselves and what that we are part of society, even though maybe not everybody recognizes that. And also just a shout out to the person who created it, Rachel Crendall, who was like, you know what, we gotta look at this as well as the really tough stuff around Trans Day of Remembrance. So yeah, kudos to her.
So when we talk about visibility, what do we actually mean by that? What does that look like in every sort of everyday life for trans and non-binary people?
Yeah, there's so many dimensions of visibility. Sometimes we have a very binary concept of it. It's like you're either visible or you're invisible, when actually, much like gender, it exists along the spectrum.
Right.
Surprise, surprise. Plot twist there. And yeah, essentially, people make either individualized or with their community choices around who to share with, when, how they want to be open about their trans identity or non-binary identity. And that can take many different forms. That the decision is one largely based on an assessment of safety with people, whether circumstances, people, organizations, you name it, or systems, whether or not they choose to share that part of themselves. Or in some instances, people are just visibly trans. And so, some people can tell by looking. And there's that aspect at play too. So some people don't even have the option of
Mm-hmm.
kind of toggling on and off or sliding the scale along the spectrum. So
Right.
there's those types of aspects to visibility, but some of it is about celebrating who we are, not being shy or, not wanting to hide who we are and just kind of being.
Right.
That can look like, okay, I want to share a part of my past, which may not be exactly how somebody expects, right? I'm a
Mm-hmm.
trans man, and I want to describe how I was raised as a girl, and there's different gendered experiences because of that.
Right.
And that could be, part of like a relaxed way of sharing one's story.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's not always possible, but when it is, I think that's a very powerful thing to do, or just to casually bring into conversation that one is trans without it being the main point, right? And then sometimes it's about coming out for the first time at work or in one's place of worship or wherever, right? So there's many different forms.
So with that, you were talking about how it's not just you're either out and visible or not.
Mm-hmm.
Comes this sort of weird thing where there's an assumption that maybe visibility is the actual goal for people, and that some people kind of can inadvertently put pressure on trans people to share aspects, especially around Trans Day of Visibility. There is this sort of like, hey, you're trans, why didn't you talk about this? Or just sort of inadvertent pressure on trans people to be visible and to share those aspects of their stories. But also there's so much complexity within that. Like a lot of people don't want to come out because of that element of safety, or even just that they don't want to share, like they're just not interested in sharing. And so I was wondering if you could go into that a little too.
Yeah, that's such a good point that there sometimes can be the expectation or the assumption that visibility equals good, invisibility equals bad. And, certainly is not the case at all. Visibility is an option available to folks if that's right for them, depending on the circumstance or their choices in general. And why it's complicated is that it's not very safe right now, and even into the past. Um, there's a lot of complexity around safety, and even if we're here in Canada, sometimes people make the assumption, oh, it's all safe. It's like, no, not at all.
Right.
And people are coming in and out of situations where they're having to wrestle with, do I share this part of myself with others? And for some, it's not safe, or even like you said, they don't want to. It's maybe not a matter of safety, but it's just like it's a thing of the past, and that they don't see as necessarily reflecting on the present. Some people who undertake some form of gender affirming care come out, then they're done. That's it. They're like the trans is a matter of the past, and they're simply men and women or non-binary folks, right? And so it's really important not to pressure anybody to have more or less visibility, because that decision making is so complex. I think we also need to consider issues of intersectionality. As soon as somebody comes out, say, is racialized, they're, say, a Black person, like there's just so many layers that they're already dealing with that maybe they don't want to deal with the trans stuff, right? Like, and if they're dealing with racism already, why do you want to add transphobia into the mix? So it's really letting people choose their own adventure because they know best what is involved and how they want to navigate it. I would also add that sometimes people are out at work and then maybe not at home, and with their families, or maybe with their friends, like, or vice versa, right? So we really want to be careful to not consider that an inconsistency. It's more of a very careful decision making process that requires these kinds of dials changed in different circumstances.
Right. And for a lot of people, that can be quite upsetting or traumatic to go into. So there's also that aspect of like, maybe don't dig into the why behind those decisions as well.
Yeah, Absolutely. Just respect them at face value. Of course, if somebody offers that unprompted, it's always a gift to hear the nuances and to
Mm.
understand them, but not to prompt for them. Because
Hmm.
oftentimes people, even if they don't intend to, it can feel like an insistence, right?
Hmm.
It's just like, well, why not? What are you talking? Why wouldn't
Right.
you be
Yeah.
out everywhere? And it's like, and we could do that within our own community too. Like,
Absolutely.
I see it all the time where I'm like, yo, let's not. Like, that there's
Hmm.
probably a very good reason. We don't need to get into it unless that person wants to. Um,
Hmm.
and they're probably feeling conflicted about it too, right? It's not a
Right.
perfect solution, but it's one that's the what's important for this time.
Hmm. So, with Trans Day of Visibility, along with other events like Pride or Trans Day of Remembrance, all of these kind of events and sort of moments to consider trans people, a lot of organizations want to recognize it in some way. But then there is also this kind of other side of it where folks in within organizations are like, well, we don't really have any trans people. So is there any point in worrying about this right now? Maybe we'll do Pride because that's a bit more generic.
Hmm.
Whereas these things that are specific to trans people, such a small community,
Hmm.
is there any point then in recognizing these within organizations? And I really was hoping you could go into that and the way that it expands so much further beyond just trans people and in how
Right.
visibility affects folks.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, the case for Trans Day visibility within an organization, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. Sometimes people think, you have to have this big fanfare when, there could be a thoughtful email or, during a meeting mentioning
Mm,
something, right? I mean, you could make an event too, but there's options available for different levels of mentioning and
mm,
and celebrating. But I think there's twofold things that are at play. Sometimes people think we don't have any trans people. Well, you don't actually know that, right?
mhm,
People think they know that, but there are people who don't come out at work, who don't ever share
mhm,
that they're trans. So how do you know whether or not you do have people? So I always like to say just assume you do and then work
mhm.
from there. And that's a much better, like safer way to think about it.
Right.
So it could really impact somebody who maybe is considering sharing more but doesn't know if it's safe. And if you, as an organization, are messaging this is an important day,
Mhm,
and we're going to put some sort of effort into it, that really is powerful for people to be like, oh, okay, they get it. They know this is a day and they see
mhm,
its importance. They're trying to communicate that to other employees. It does also set a tone where it's like, okay, this organization respects trans people, considers them an important part of society. There's just so much that's happening in society right now where some people are backing away from and even actively hostile towards trans people. And this
right.
type of messaging is critical. It's like you kind of like sitting on the sidelines is a choice,
Mhm,
and one that is heard by, even if it doesn't seem like something active, it's not active to not do something, it is
mhm.
heard.
Yeah.
The other part is what you were referencing is that even if you don't have a trans or non-binary person in your midst, you do have potentially or a high likelihood that you have family members, friends, partners, even community members, who know trans and non-binary folks. A big one is parents of kids that know a trans kid.
Mm,
Like,
right.
so we're not like, we do this in surveys. We ask people, do you know trans people? And I would say, I'm always surprised, but it's upwards of 75% of respondents who are cisgender say they know somebody, like,
Really?
consistently.
Oh my
And we've done
goodness.
this over so many organizations, and it's time and time again, people know somebody. And so
Mm,
it's not like a theoretical thing for them. And for them to hear their organization um, speak positively, supportively about trans and non-binary folks is a big deal. And
mhm,
oftentimes they want an opportunity to talk about what's happening right now and the kind of backlash against trans people, and they're
Right.
very frightened, as well as
Hmm.
trans people too, right? So
Right. Yeah.
it's just like you have this opportunity in that day for people to witness and or possibly also to speak.
Mm. One of the questions that we get, and it's something that I've seen on social media before now too, is about sort of on that uh, cis people who are friends or have family members or just loved ones that are trans, whether Trans Day of Visibility events, sort of, I'm
Mhm.
more kind of talking outside of work now, whether they're allowed to
Mm.
join, whether they're allowed to
Mhm.
be a part of that, and what the role of cis people, I guess, is within Trans Day of Visibility. So,
Mm.
yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, it's a really important question because people are pretty nervous and they want to be
Hmm.
respectful. And so they
Right.
don't want to misstep as they're
Hmm.
trying to be supportive, right? So
Hmm.
I get that tendency to ask. And certainly we can't make a blanket statement here. We would
Right.
defer to individual events that are being organized that are typically very clear about who is included and not. And I would say 99.99% of the time, maybe 98% of the time, it is intended to include the general population. And in
Hmm.
fact, trans and non-binary community members would love for cisgender people to show up because a lot of them are frightened and are wondering where the allies are. And
Hmm.
this is a very powerful way to show, even though you're not like announcing that you're cisgender as you're
Right.
attending, but you know, I think people can get a general sense as people are sharing, you know, what
Hmm.
their story is or their experience, as whether they're part of the community or not. But that
Right.
showing up is a really important signal at this juncture. And so, for the most part, people are invited and welcomed, and there's a relief when people come.
Mm.
You asked, and I don't think I answered about the role of cis people at Trans Day of Visibility events that are organized by the community. I think that's a really important question because sometimes people don't know, okay, what's expected of me. Certainly, I don't
Mm.
think there's expectations, but when a few things I invite folks to do beyond listening, I think listening is very powerful. And
Yes.
the stories will likely be very moving, very compelling,
Mm.
and also difficult, right?
Of course.
There's a lot of trauma. And there's a lot to celebrate too, but those
Hmm.
often come together. Um, the other thing I think it is about connecting with people locally. So not being afraid after an event. There's usually a little bit of kind of talking amongst ourselves, kind of thing, to
Mm.
like reach out to people and say, "Hi, my name is," you know, and introduce yourself and talk with them and you know just say what you really appreciated about the event, right? Just it doesn't have to be a big thing, but I
Mm.
think having connection with people is really important. And I find sometimes if I'm nervous about a topic, I might not reach out. I
Right.
might hold back. I might attend and then flee.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you shouldn't. I mean, I invite people to try to go a little bit further
Mm.
past that. And then I also invite folks, once you've listened to all of that, is think about three things that you want to take away and do either differently or additionally, or maybe they mention another event and you're going to go to that, right? So, like,
Mm.
not to have that be a one and done. It's more like this is opening the door to a larger journey.
Mm. I wanted to go back to talking about organizations for a second because you also hold sessions for organizations around
Mhm.
Trans Day Visibility, also Ida Hobbit, also Pride,
Right.
also all of these other
Mhm.
events. But um, you have these sessions, and when you go into organizations, there's often a space included for
Mm.
storytelling from participants. And I was wondering if you could sort of talk about the impact that those stories have when it comes to moving this from something a bit more like abstract. Maybe a lot of people haven't even heard of Trans Day Visibility, aren't
Mm.
quite sure. Moving it from the sort of abstract to like, oh, this really affects so
Yeah.
many people beyond these trans people that I don't know.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think these are really powerful sessions that we host. Uh, you know, provide a little bit of context and background, maybe even a very quick, terms and concepts, just
Mm.
to get people situated. And then we go into, what's the role of an individual organization, what they can do to be active allies. And then the storytelling is actually my favorite part, because
Mm.
we anonymously collect stories before the session through an anonymous survey people can submit. Of course, we can't read everyone because usually there's quite a strong response,
Mhm.
where it's both trans and non-binary themselves, people themselves who are sharing either challenges or things that they are celebrating or really thankful for. And then there's also the family, friends, community members who share about what they've witnessed. And
Mm.
I think that's really powerful because, one, people are paying attention, which is really, really important. And it
Mhm.
weighs on them so heavily because they're
Right.
like, yeah, we saw this awful treatment. And maybe they intervened, maybe they didn't know how to intervene, and they
Mhm.
felt frustrated that they didn't know and are kind of trying to express this. There are parents who are really afraid of their children's future if they have trans
Right.
kids, or even the
Mm.
trans kids that are friends of their kids who are
Mhm.
cisgender. It's just really touching, and people can realize by witnessing these stories just how much of an impact it has on
Mm.
trans people themselves, but also,
Right.
emanating out like in concentric circles, and
Mhm.
that people are wrestling with this, like they're at work doing their thing, but this is in the background, on their hearts and their minds.
Mhm.
And so it makes it really tangible and not a distant thing.
Right. Yeah. Sort of trans adjacent. There's a lot of
Hmm.
people who are touched by the stories of trans people and the experiences of trans people, regardless of whether they are trans or not.
Hmm.
So to close up, then, unless you have other things you want to share, I really wanted to ask about, for people who are listening, whether they're individuals or as part of an organization, that they really want to mark Trans Day of Visibility in a thoughtful way this year.
Hmm.
What kind of approach or things can they do to um, really hold space for Trans Day of Visibility and all of the complexities that come with that, especially this year?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so many different ways that we can do it. I mean, events are the more obvious thing that
Mm.
people gravitate towards. Um, and, there's a time and a place for that. Although you would want to be very intentional about that in terms of how it's
Hmm.
planned and, when it happens and who's attending and whatnot.
Hmm.
But there's other things too. It could be kind of a low key lunch and learn, get together, have a
Right.
few, comments about what it is, and then just open up for people to talk. Because oftentimes people just want to talk,
Mm.
because there's a
Yeah.
lot going on and they're not knowing what to do,
Hmm.
or how to be. I think there's also a place for like a carefully crafted email to say, today is Trans Day of
Mm.
Visibility, and this is what it's about, and here's a link to some local events or maybe just
Mm.
singular event. So really encouraging folks to connect with the community, I think is really important, so that they can have their own experience of, even if they're have no clue about anything. Like, I think
Hmm.
that's so important to show up to see it firsthand. Um, and then there's just other ways. Sometimes people set up libraries at like
Mm.
for the week. It doesn't. I think one day is probably fast, but for a week where you can center trans authors or trans artists, so that there's some,
Hmm.
again, especially if it's local, that would be amazing. May not always be the case, but certainly doing a little legwork to see if that's possible. So it's just like, and then connecting it with food always works well
Yeah.
in some way or another.
Of course.
Putting food around the library,
Hmm.
um, things like that. I know cupcakes in trans colors are a big hit, as an
Mm.
example. So things like that.
Right. So it doesn't need to be a big complex thing then. It can just be like an acknowledgement, and
Yeah.
you don't have to do anything wild.
No.
Not that I know what wild things people would do, I suppose.
If there's interest among people listening to participate in or to arrange one of those Trans Day Visibility sessions, we'll put a link in the show notes that you can read a little bit more about it or involve others at your organizations. But we'd be happy to have a conversation to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kai, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye for now.